Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Jay's Fifth Down Football Podcast. I'm your host, Jaden, and today I'm here with Chad Jensen. He is the host of the Mile High Huddle Podcast there. He covers the Denver Broncos, so we appreciate him coming on to talk about Denver today on the podcast. Chad, thanks for your time, man. We appreciate it.
Really excited to join you, Jaden. Thanks for the invite.
Of course, no problem, man. So obviously, Chad, Denver, they traded for Russell Wilson, last offseason, right? Like, hey, we need a quarterback. That was the thing they were missing was a quarterback, right? And they put the chips in for him. He's a Super Bowl winner, MVP guy. It's a caliber player, but it doesn't go the way it was expected to go. So can you just kind of quickly recap Denver's season and how, it was just a mess, man?
Yeah, I mean, here's the perception from inside Denver, which is Russell Wilson. That trade was made on the heels of 6 straight seasons of missing the playoffs, which 1 year prior, so after they went 5 straight years of missing the playoffs, the Broncos became the first team in the Super Bowl era to win a Super Bowl and then miss the playoffs in the subsequent 5 seasons. Then it became 6. Then the Broncos acquired Russ, and everyone's like, all right, cool. And they hired Nathaniel Hackett. And they're like, all right, we got our guy. The franchise quarterback is the ship or the tide that raises all ships. Well, unfortunately, with very few exceptions, I mean, I would throw maybe Peyton Manning, Tom Brady as the exceptions of the modern era to what I'm about to say. The franchise quarterback definitely is cornerstone piece number 1 you have to have. But if he is not complemented by highly competent coaching, it'll be squandered. And that's what happened for the Broncos last season, is not to take any of the onus for how things shook out off Russ. Russell shares his fair amount of complicity in how things shook out, but it was a wild comedy of errors helmed by a head coach, a first-year head coach in Nathaniel Hackett, who was so incompetent, all right? He became one of just 2 head coaches in the Super Bowl era to be fired before his first season was even in the books. That's how unprecedentedly bad Nathaniel Hackett was. And it trickled downhill to every facet of the team, with the exception of the defense, which stayed pretty sharp thanks to Ejiro Evero, very savvy coordinator who was smart enough to kind of not mess around with what Vic Fangio had already established in the years prior. But Russell Wilson, in Seattle, he kept talking about for years, we'd hear these passive-aggressive reports about hashtag let Russ cook, right? What he wanted is he's not getting the MVP votes, yet he's stacking the Pro Bowls. He's stacking the stats. He's stacking the playoff wins. All these things. Why am I not getting that MVP love? It's because I look around, I see Tom, I see Aaron Rodgers, I see Peyton Manning, et cetera, over the years. The drop-back quarterbacks that are able to just, pass at a 3-to-1 clip over the run, whereas the Seahawks, right, they're a run-first team. In their, the best years of the Seahawks, that's what they were. And he finally got what he wanted, right? He got the organization and a coach that was willing to trust him and say, okay, yeah, let's go ahead and let you cook, Russ. And it turned out he wasn't ready. So he either wasn't ready or capable of being that quarterback that he thought he could be, or it just simply was the wrong coaching fit for him. But it's pretty evident. The last thing I'll say on this is, career lows in many respects, if you look at his stats. And but those last 2 games after Hackett was fired and that cloud of incompetence was blown out of the Mile High City, you saw when interim head coach at the time, Jerry Rosburg, made a few different changes, put in a new play caller, Russ turned the ship around. He looked like vintage Russ in those final 2 games. They won one of them. It was against both playoff teams from the AFC West, the Chiefs and the Chargers. Fell to the Chiefs, but it was a game all the way down to the wire. Played well, and then beat the Chargers in a game where their fans were going, why aren't we resting our starters? They didn't rest the starters until Russ put the game out of reach in the 4th quarter. So I think that's a big part of why Sean Payton looked around and said, yeah, I can go to Denver and take all this money and et cetera, because I saw some common sense moves and changes be made after Hackett was fired, and I saw the palpable result in Russell Wilson's play.
Yeah, and I mean, watching Denver last year, man. It's and they had great talent too, man. Especially defensively. All those guys, Pat Surtain, one of my favorite players in the league. And offensively, still Jerry Jeudy, Cortland Sutton. Great receivers. Javonte Williams. A shame that he got hurt, man, in the middle of the season there, because he was really good. He's a great player. So, off that note, man, would you say that time could possibly be running out for us if he doesn't? If him and Sean Payton can't, correlate there and get that fix, man, is Russ running out of time?
I think it's fair to say that he's definitely under some pressure. Time implies that there is some kind of freedom of choice here. And by that, I just simply mean that although, the Broncos are owned by the richest owners in the league now, they're still governed by the strictures of the salary cap. And after this season, let's say Russ fails to launch, right, with Sean Payton, and Sean Payton at some point has to turn to Jarrett Stidham, the backup he signed, his handpicked quarterback. What do you do with Russ? Well, you can cut Russ and eat many tens of millions of dollars in dead cap in 2024, which would be followed by similarly just crippling dead cap numbers the following season and the one after that. So while the Broncos could say, you know what, if it became a failure, we'll bite the bullet. It's better for us to just bite the bullet and move on from this Russ thing than keep him on the roster in a diminished role as a backup now or whatever. Is it possible? Yes. I just don't see it. I don't see it happening. I think Russell Wilson really is the quarterback that we all knew him to be all those years in Seattle. I mean, again, 10 years in Seattle, 9 Pro Bowl berths, 8 of those 10 seasons he led his team to the playoffs, 9 playoff wins, a world championship. This is not just some guy that had a flash in the pan season back in the day in Seattle, and then, years go by, Broncos acquire him via trade, and someone's trying to bring back some 2013 version of Russell Wilson. No, this dude went to the Pro Bowl the year before the year prior to the Broncos acquiring him. It was a strange confluence of events that led to that massive regression from Russ last year. And Sean Payton, he's just not a coach that will make those same mistakes. He's already taken great steps to basically clean up a lot of the messes that were left by the Nathaniel Hackett regime, and we haven't even gotten to football yet. So I actually feel very confident in my optimism about Russ making these type of questions, which are fair. I get it. We talk about these exact same questions every night on my podcast, but I think he'll make them basically by the time we look back on this season, come, end of February, et cetera, people will be looking at Russell Wilson a lot differently than they are now.
Yeah. That's the hope. And Sean Payton, definitely the guy that can definitely, if anybody can right that ship there is Sean. So what are you looking forward to as far as what he brings to the table as a coach? What are you looking for as far as the offense and the changes you'd like to see, how you think he can help turn into a different direction?
Well, first thing, when the Broncos were going through the hiring process after they fired Hackett and the season was in the books, I talked about on my show that the governing principle here needs to be a coach who exemplifies #extreme competency. And Sean Payton does that in spades. All right. He's 15-year head coach. He's been to the top of the mountain. If we can go back and talk about all the different offensive rankings of his teams over those years and whatnot. But if that weren't impressive enough on its face, his history with quarterbacks alone was enough to go, okay, yeah, we can buy what this cat is selling, because it's not just taking a chance, which they did, by the way. Sean Payton and the Saints took a big chance on Drew Brees when they signed him as a free agent back in 2006, because he was coming off what most teams believed was a career-ending shoulder injury that he suffered, ironically, against the Broncos in the season finale in 2005. Right. And there were only 2 teams that even kicked the tires on Brees that free agent period. It was Miami, who at the time was helmed by Nick Saban, all right, the Miami Dolphins, very short-lived, and the New Orleans Saints, and the Saints wanted him. They took him. And so it was no, people think, oh, yeah, well, of course Sean Payton had all that success he did for 15 years because he had Drew Brees. No. He had to basically rebuild Drew Brees, who had some success. He made a Pro Bowl, had some modest success in San Diego prior to his injury, but he had to totally reshape this dude and fit him into what he does best. So getting back to your question about what gives me confidence in Sean Payton's abilities is he is extremely competent at what he does. He brings swagger back to the building. He brings a level of expectation and excellence that has been missing, frankly, since Gary Kubiak resigned. And then his insane, wildly, it's almost a psychotic attention to detail. One small example is, and this might not sound like anything too wild, but in a simple press conference, when he got asked earlier this offseason about some play call he made in a famous game with the Saints, and it was a big 4th down call, and he was asked about it, and what gave you the confidence to call that play in that moment, So it was kind of a controversial move that paid off for the Saints. And he's like, look, one thing people need to understand is, even though what you saw was seemingly from the outside looking in was a coach making a gut call on a whim in a critical situation in a game in the 4th quarter, in all actuality, that was a decision that had been made on Wednesday and of that week prior, right? So the attention to detail, we've already seen it come out in the wash in terms of the off-season training program, in how in what their focus is when it comes to team practice, the type of things they're focusing on. It's not just, hey, let's get into 7-on-7 drills and throw the ball around and whatnot. No, they are working maniacally on situational stuff, the key things, right? Red zone, 3rd down, 4th down. And they're mastering that, and they're getting all that under their belt so that it becomes, second nature. So it's like breathing. So that when they get to those situations come the season, it's not like it was last year for Russell Wilson in the offense, where you got to a critical 3rd down, you got to a critical red zone play or late game situation, and they were woefully unprepared. It's like the play that got called, they had never seen before. They'd never ran it. This is what it seemed like. Or that they had never played in such a, situation in their entire football careers. I mean, it was wildly, it was wild. So I'm really excited about that. And just all of the when we talk about extreme competency and all that experience, Jaden, we're talking about that trickling down to every aspect of the team, from all of his coaching hires to his personnel moves. I mean, everything he did to rebuild the offensive line in the free agent period and all that. So I think the ticker is definitely pointing up with the Sean Payton Broncos.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, you mentioned those that situational awareness, man. That's huge for a football team, where there's offense, defense, even special teams. And if you don't have that, if your coaching staff and your players are not, on the same page as far as that situational awareness, and that's not something that is being pressed all the time, that's going to be an issue. And those are specific areas where the Broncos struggle, like you mentioned, 3rd downs and those long yardage situations, and even in the red zone where they woefully struggled. So I'm looking forward, like you said, to seeing how he like you said, the attention to detail and the effort to clean that up. Like, hey, this is gonna be, let's move with some pace to this, and so that's what I like about Sean Payton, man. He's always been that way, and I think he's gonna bring some good things to the city of Denver. But
dude, real quick, not to cut you off, but I think back to some of those Russell Wilson Seahawks teams, and as a guy coming from Broncos country, groomed to hate the Seahawks because we shared a division with them for the majority of their existence in the NFL. They were an AFC West team until whatever it was, late 90s. Can't remember the exact year that they got moved conference and then put in the NFC West, but Super Bowl 48, I mean, that made it to where mortal enemies, like no Broncos fan walking the earth, could not hate the Seattle Seahawks. I mean, that was a curb stomping beatdown to end all curb stomping beatdowns. But I only say that because, when they would cross paths or you turn on a Seahawks game all those years in Seattle, and one of the hallmarks of Russell Wilson, the quarterback, was just how straight up stubborn he was to fail in critical situations, whether it was a third down, red zone, end of game, etc. Like, he would find a way, make a way. He was a find a way, make a way guy. And of course, there's always exceptions to that prove the rule, but like, that was nowhere to be found in Denver in year one. And a big reason for it is, you look back, it's all about coaching emphasis, like you were saying. It's all about coaching philosophy. You know, what's worked on and emphasized and focused on in the off season is what is going to be, is how it's kind of going to come out in the wash when the games start to count. And so you could see those were not things that Nathaniel Hackett really prioritized. So even though a lot of that stuff, I'm sure, was muscle memory for Russell Wilson, as far as knowing these critical situations, kind of knowing maybe in a backyard football kind of way what he needs to do. But from a schematic perspective, he wasn't given the tools and the training and the preparation by his coaches to effectuate it. That's my read on this situation. And I think Sean Payton, that's another example of a big difference you're going to see in Russ in 2023.
No, yeah, greatly said, man. I agree. And I think it's going to be, and again, you have great talent returning. Because there were talks, I know, the past couple of months about them possibly moving Judy or Sutton. Obviously, It didn't happen. I didn't think it was going to happen, because why would you do that? These guys are like your two best receivers. But like I was saying though earlier, man, besides Russell Wilson, obviously, being the elephant in the room, who's another player, or maybe two players, I don't know, that they got to step the game up, that the Broncos need them to perform?
Yeah. Well, the first one that comes to mind is Randy Gregory, right? The rush linebacker, who the Broncos gave a 5-year, $70 million deal last offseason. And at the time I was like, yo, this is not a wise move. Not because I was too worried about like his off the field stuff that was responsible for so much of his missed games and suspensions, but honestly, it was his injury history. I was like, oh man, it's not so much can't make the club from the tub thing. It's can't get a return on that investment from the tub thing. And that's a lot of money to put in a rush linebacker who had never totaled double-digit sacks in a single season. But I started to kind of forget some of those misgivings when I saw him in training camp, and just that dog mentality he brought to the defense that had frankly been missing since even before Von Miller was traded. Like, I'm talking Derek Wolfe was probably the last dog that was on defense. Before him, Aqib Talib, just guys who set the tone and are just ravenous wild animals out there. And Gregory was obviously that great team guy as far as culture and chemistry. And so I'm like, all right, I'm coming around on this dude. But then unfortunately, the big fears, they came to fruition when he had that knee injury. I think it was week 4. And then he went on to miss basically the rest of the season. He did come back kind of half-heartedly. They kicked the tires on him, brought him back for 2 games in which he was not 100%. So thus he was ineffectual. And then they busted him back down to injured reserve and called it a season. So Randy Gregory is a guy, and even last year, pressure to kind of justify the contract. But at least if he didn't work out going into 2022, you're like, all right, you got Bradley Chubb. He'll be all right. And a couple of young guys. They drafted Nick Bonito in the 2nd round that year. And then the year prior, Baron Browning, who they'd moved to rush linebacker. So you're like, all right, they'll be all right. Chubb's gone. Nick Bonito showed that he has a lot to learn in terms of being an NFL edge. And Baron Browning's hurt. So what did the Broncos do? They went out and they signed Frank Clark, who I like Frank Clark, but he's another guy who one time in his career has he eclipsed double-digit sack totals. A lot of people don't realize that. He is consistent. He's good against the run. He's versatile in a lot of ways, but he's not a prolific sack artist. Let me just put it that way. Not to say that he couldn't be, but at least it's a balance. You got a guy with a couple of 2-3 Pro Bowls on his resume now that's going to be complimenting Gregory on the other side, but I still don't really see the upside there with Frank that Gregory could provide if he were to stay healthy. Gregory is a guy that, to me, you can get him on the field for even 80 to 85% of the season's games. He will give you double-digit sacks. He will give you that high-impact pressure on the quarterback that affects games. So he's the first guy that comes to mind for me, and he's healthy. He's out there. He's been doing his thing in throughout the organized team activity period. So I'm hopeful on him. And then one other guy I'll throw out real quick is Albert Okwuegbunam, who is a fourth-year tight end, former fourth-round pick out of Mizzou. Kind of handpicked, drafted, so to speak, by Drew Lock, believe it or not, his college teammate. Showed some flashes, a lot of upside, but he's not only entering a contract year, but the Broncos kind of showed him what they thought of him last year by drafting Greg Dulcich in the third round. It's like, all right, dude, this is your make or break. And we all know what kind of production tight ends have had traditionally in Sean Payton's system. So, like, I think Albert Okwuegbunam, not just by virtue of it being in the contract year, but by virtue of the other additions that have been made at tight end and Sean Payton's kind of standard, like, if he doesn't show out in training camp, he might not even make it to the final cut. So, and that would be a shame because he is a talented cat.
Yeah, solid. I do like Albert there. I think he's going to be a good player. I think he has the potential to be, and overall the Broncos as a whole, man, they are a talented group, a team that I think, again, with the right person leading the charge, can make some noise. So we will see what happens with the Broncos next season, man. But Chad, we appreciate you coming on the podcast today, man, and giving us that insight, from within the Denver Broncos, club there, and just as to, about Russell Wilson, and hopefully he'll get back on the saddle with Sean Payton leading the charge. So we'll see what happens there, man. But thank you for coming on the show.
From your lips to God's ears on the Russ thing. My pleasure. Really appreciate the invite, Jaden, and thanks for having me.
Of course, man. And we will, be talking with you very soon, Chad.